Let's look briefly over the sections in Chapter 5 pertaining to statistics. Again, take note of the page number that I'm on in the e-text as I briefly go through some of these big ideas. So starting on page 294 towards the bottom, there's a video to introduce us to Section 5A, Fundamentals of Statistics. Starting on the next page, we go immediately into a lot of vocabulary. And vocabulary is really important here in this and other sections of this chapter. So please take your time reading through these definitions and truly trying to apply those terms the way they should be used in the problems. I'm going to skip ahead to page 297. On this page, we have this figure of the elements of a statistical study, how that happens, and even these arrows we could say here that kind of point us to where to go from one step to the next step to the next. And then on page 299, I like these images for different ways that we can sample a population. So these are different sampling techniques. And you'll see the true definition on the previous page, but after reading that definition, come back to these images and see that you can make the connections between these popular sampling techniques. These are not all sampling techniques, by the way, and there is so much more vocabulary to statistics than's even presented here, believe it or not. But this is going to get you a good start into statistics. If you find that you're really interested in it, then you need to take the statistics class as well, and you can go even deeper into statistics. So I'm going to skip on ahead to page 309. This is our next section. It does have a video introduction, and this one's really just about the guidelines for evaluating a statistical study. We see these 8 guidelines that you can read through, but the nice thing is through the section, they take one guideline at a time and show you an example of how you apply that particular guideline. Again, as you look at these examples, you've got additional examples as well as a video of the example in the text. So take your time going through those to see how you evaluate the legitimacy of statistical studies. Okay, I'm going to move on ahead to the next section, page 319. This one starts here towards the middle of the page. Statistical tables and graphs. Again, a video overview I highly encourage you to watch. Again, lots of vocabulary. But this one focuses on really a lot of technology. Now, certainly you can make a lot of these graphs by hand, but in the working world, most people use some type of software to make these graphs. And a very common accessible software is Excel. So I encourage you to look through how you would make these types of graphs and tables and charts using the technology that's featured on page 321. Page 325 is another one. Here's bar graphs and pie charts. And on page 327, line charts in Excel. Now, Excel will do even more than these basic graphs, but sometimes, as we'll see in one of the later sections, simple is best. All right, so speaking of one of those later sections, let's move on ahead to that one. That starts on page 333. Again, a good introduction video that I highly encourage that you watch. These graphs presented in this section are the more involved graphs. Maybe they have a third dimension or they have multiple graphs on one grid. And there are ways that you can create them in Excel. You'll see a little bit of that here in this section. But the biggest thing that we're looking at is how to read these graphs in this section. So you'll see lots of examples of how to read these types of multiple bar graphs or multiple line graphs and make sense from them. On page 337, this is an example that shows you how to use Excel to make a stacked graph. You may have seen some things like that in the news or media. And then what I find very important here, because this section is not as much about you making the graphs as it is reading them, understanding them, and then evaluating them. So down towards the bottom of page 340, we have a few cautions about graphics. This is where this starts. And probably the way I can sum this up best is simple is best. Don't add a third dimension to a graph if it doesn't need a third dimension. For instance, don't confuse area with length. That's what we see going on here. There's a distortion. Another one is distortion of axes, or on the scale on the axes. A couple of other ones presented in this section are when we have graphs with percent change and pictographs. So again, the simpler the graph, the better. If we add too many bells and whistles, it may mislead our reader, maybe even purposely misread the reader, which a lot of times is us. We are the reader, so we have to be very aware of that and evaluate that. Okay, so last section starts on page 354. Again, a video, lots of vocabulary. This particular vocabulary is on correlation versus causation. It starts automatically with correlation here. Skipping ahead to 356, there's a little bit of information on scatter plots and how you would graph a scatter plot or read a scatter plot. These scatter plots do relate two variables at once on the graph. On the next page, 357, we see different types of relationships that we can have between two variables and ways that we can describe them. So we can describe the correlations as positive, negative, or none, no correlation. And then we can even take it a step further and give that correlation a strength, strong positive or weak positive. And if you take statistics, you'll find that you can go a step further than that. You can put a numerical value to that strength. So there's lots of layers here really to the statistics stuff, but this will, again, give you a really good introduction to statistics for what you would use at work and then in just everyday life. On page 359, there's a little piece here about Excel, how to make scatter plots in Excel. If you have not already learned this skill, this is a really good one to have. Again, something that you may even use in other classes or at work. And then one more thing I wanted to point out starts on page 361, and this is about the guidelines for establishing causality. So there is a difference between correlation versus causation, and causation implies even more. It says that one variable causes the other to happen. And sometimes we go there too quick. We really need to investigate, can we go there? Can we take the correlation a step further by looking at these guidelines? And then last but not least, I just want to point you to the summary on page 369. This is where you may be able to find those keywords a little quickly, or key ideas and skills referenced by page number. You see here there's not a whole lot of formulas. It wasn't like the last chapter, but much more vocabulary. As you go through these problems in My Math Lab, again, don't forget, use Ask My Instructor if you come across a question and you're not sure what to do. That comes directly to me. I make a video response and send it back to you.